Have you ever noticed that the people who refuse to ask for help are usually the ones carrying the heaviest burdens? In the United States, we genuinely love a good self-made story. We glorify the lone wolf, the ultimate individualist who pulls themselves up by their bootstraps and needs absolutely no one to succeed. But what if I told you that this fierce, unbreakable independence is not always a sign of inner strength? What if, in many cases, it is actually a deeply ingrained trauma response? Right now, the statistics are staggering. An estimated 70% of adults in the United States have experienced a severe traumatic event at least once in their lives. The hidden economic burden of trauma and stress-related disorders costs our country over $585 billion every single year. Furthermore, the National Center for PTSD reports that about 13 million Americans are living with PTSD in any given year. Going through too much is a silent epidemic in our society. Welcome to Deep Psyche Decode. Today, we are decoding the psychology of resilience and unpacking a phenomenon known as hyperindependence. Let us start by looking at how our culture traditionally views resilience. From Hollywood blockbusters to the toxic hustle culture plastered across our screens, we are sold a pervasive illusion. We live in an era of algorithmic anxiety, where every swipe feeds us the lie that going through trauma turns you into a tough, emotionally detached warrior. When we hit a wall, the standard advice is to just work harder. We think that if you grind out an 80-hour work week, hyper-optimize your routine, and stay constantly busy, you can somehow outrun your pain. But clinical psychology paints a profoundly different picture. You know this picture because you live it. You are the friend who is always there for everyone else. You give incredible advice, pick up the pieces, and fix everyone else's problems. But the exact moment you start to struggle yourself, you isolate. You go completely off the grid. You refuse to let your partner help with the bills. You will not let a friend give you a ride to the airport, and you certainly never cry in front of anyone. You tell yourself, I have got this. I do not need anyone. In my analysis of modern psychological trends, I have found that we often mistake a nervous system in distress for a personality trait to be admired. We look at someone who never asks for a favor, and we call them disciplined. But the National Institutes of Health has examined the neurodevelopmental approach to trauma, finding that when you go through something devastating, your nervous system actually gets physically rewired. You get stuck in a perpetual state of fight or flight. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, becomes hyperactive. When we talk about hyperindependence, we are not talking about a lifestyle choice. We are talking about a highly evolved biological survival mechanism. If you grew up in an environment where the people who were supposed to protect you ended up hurting you, or if you went through a massive betrayal later in adult life, perhaps navigating the exhausting landscape of modern dating fatigue, where trust feels like a liability, your brain learns a tragic lesson. It calculates that relying on others is inherently dangerous. It decides that the only person you can truly trust, the only one who will never drop the ball or break your heart, is you. So you build an impenetrable fortress. Every brick is a boundary born from a moment you were let down. Every iron gate is a memory of a time you asked for help and received silence. I honestly believe that the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that we are protecting our peace, when in reality, we are just barricading our pain. We convince ourselves that our isolation is a form of sanctuary. But deep down, it is just the terrified part of your brain trying to prevent another heartbreak. This brings us to a fascinating psychological reality called the empathy paradox. You might think that someone who has endured years of emotional abuse, neglect, or profound loss would inevitably become bitter. You might expect them to look at the world with dark cynicism, but usually, the exact opposite happens. People who have gone through too much often develop a profound, almost superhuman level of empathy. Because they have walked through the darkest valleys, they possess an acute radar for the suffering of others. They can walk into a room and instantly spot the person who is secretly holding back tears. They become the kindest, most generous people you will ever meet. constantly trying to shield others from the darkness they navigated entirely alone. But here is the catch. This empathy becomes a double-edged sword when paired with hyperindependence. You end up absorbing everyone else's stress while completely suppressing your own. You carry 100 pounds of emotional baggage, constantly smiling and telling everyone it is as light as a feather. I have observed time and time again that our society's obsession with presenting a flawless, frictionless life online forces hyper-independent people to bury their struggles even deeper. You fear that if you show a single crack in your armor, you will become a burden. Eventually, your physical body keeps the score. The National Council for Mental Well-Being highlights a massive correlation between extreme, prolonged stress, trauma, and severe physical health conditions. This is known as allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on your biological systems. Your immune system tanks, your blood pressure spikes. You feel a constant, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep fixes. Because holding up a massive emotional fortress by yourself takes a tremendous amount of physiological energy. So, how do we transition from merely surviving to genuinely experiencing what the American Psychological Association calls post-traumatic growth? Developed by U.S. psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, they found that true resilience is not about shutting the world out by working yourself to the bone. It is not about becoming an unfeeling rock. The famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung once stated, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." True post-traumatic growth means facing the pain head-on. It means looking at your hyperindependence not as a flaw, but as a brilliant, data-driven cognitive ability that kept you alive. You do not need to destroy your fortress, but you do need to learn how to lower the drawbridge. The Mayo Clinic emphasizes emotional regulation and cognitive adaptation. You have to actively challenge the belief that asking for help makes you a burden. True resilience requires flexibility. The author Robert Jordan captured this beautifully when he wrote, "The oak fought the wind and was broken. The willow bent when it must and survived." When you are hyper-independent, you act exactly like the oak. You stand rigid, taking the full force of the storm alone. To heal, you must learn to be the willow. Allow yourself to bend, to lean on your support systems, to adapt. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You survived the worst days of your life, but you do not have to keep living like you are under attack. You are allowed to let someone else take the wheel. If you found value in this psychological breakdown, hit that subscribe button. Join us here at Deep Psyche Decode to unravel the human mind. Drop a comment below if you have struggled with hyperindependence. Take care, and remember to let others take care of you too.